You know, the one thing COVID brought us that kind of could be celebrated is more people on bikes. And in particular, a lot more folks got involved with Zwift and Peloton and our fans Trainer Road. When in-person competition was shut down, we raced each other on our screens. And what did we notice through all that? It gets really hot when you are trying to chase someone down, sprint, or rip up a mountain while sitting on your trainer.
Oh, Hottie, I can't even imagine how many fans must have been bought and sold during those times. I personally have 4 fans, which, 2 fans per person, going on in my bike trainer room, and it is the best anti-misery money I have ever spent. I hope most newcomers have kept up their riding and training, and I gotta say, for me, the stationary trainer, the intense heat, the intense workout that it brings, it's always been kind of a thing for me. I like it. I'm super glad that our friends at Shimano have also been paying attention to this new category in riding and racing. They've responded to these hot workouts with an entire line of shoes designed to be ridden indoors. Because in addition to your feet, or the rest of your body getting hot, your feet get hot too.
Yeah, in their shoe department, Shimano has 8 models good for indoor riding, and 4 of those models are specifically designed for riding on a trainer. Sounds kind of strange, but no, it's true. Women have 3 of those models. They have the IC2, the IC3, and the IC5. All of the indoor models share a heat-dissipating characteristic, and that's a lightweight mesh upper. Enclosure is either BOA or Velcro. No hipster laces that is, here to delay you getting into your trainer shoes and into your workout. All shoes are 2-hole mountain bike pedal compatible, just what a Leadville racer needs. Mrs. Hottie has a pair of these shoes. I don't even remember a model. It was like the first model they came out with them, and she loves them.
Yeah, I don't have a pair yet, but I have had my eye on them for a long time. Shimano shoes are the only ones I wear, and that has been true since long before this podcast ever began. They are just the most comfortable shoes around, with an incredible variety of sizes, and this is important to me, widths as well.
Shimano even has a dedicated webpage to indoor cycling gear. It's shimano.indoor.com. So if you are on the trainer and your dogs are barking, check out that Shimano solution. And thanks to Shimano for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. You can find them at bike.shimano.com. We're up to episode 9 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I am Michael Houghton, high to most.
And I'm Fatty, and we are headed to Twin Lakes. We're headed down from Pipeline on this sort of flat, fairly fast, and with one small nasty downhill and a taste of single track. It's a fun section.
Yeah, it is fun. We are also taking a serious look on this show at hydration. Dr. Kevin Sprouse is back with specific instructions on how to estimate your fluid losses and how you should go about refilling the tank. This is our hydration episode, and trust us, what Dr. Sprouse has to say will make a difference in your Leadville 100.
Before we get rolling into the show, though, Hottie, we want to acknowledge the loss of Mariah Wilson. Hottie, I know you're heartbroken. I'm heartbroken over this incredible tragedy, and our sympathy definitely goes out to everyone who knew Mo, and like a lot of us who had become familiar with her and fans of her by watching the Lifetime Grand Prix series or Leadville last year. She made a lot of fans with her energy, with her incredible talent, with her speed, and her niceness. Honestly, we were obviously looking forward to seeing her in the rest of this Grand Prix series in Leadville this year. Incredible tragedy, and it frankly is just incomprehensible how awful that is.
Yeah, she truly was a talent, too. This year, she had rattled off 3 significant wins already: Sea Otter, Belgian Waffle Ride, Rock Cobbler. And last year, we got a clue about her talents when she scored an impressive 2nd place in her first Leadville 100. Now, if you'd like to do something on behalf of Mariah Wilson, go to the feed and buy a Ride Like Mo water bottle. All the money will be going to a scholarship fund of the family's choosing. Shipping costs will be picked up by the feed. I'm pretty good with the pre-race nerves. Like, nothing makes me too anxious in the days and hours before gun time, except one thing: the weather. I do obsess over the forecast. Getting caught out in some rain or hail or snow really kind of works me up. And it's really dumb because, there's nothing you can do about the weather except one thing, and that is prepare for anything.
Yeah, I would say that calling it dumb is exactly off the mark. You're doing exactly what you can do and what you should do. It's going to be cold at the start line. That's one weather prediction I am very confident in making. It's going to be 40 degrees or colder. And it gets colder as you head down out of town, thanks to our good friend wind chill. Plus, you're dropping down into colder temps. You could be in literally freezing temperatures. Usually, though, by the time you start climbing, as you hit the sun, the rest of the day is typically, and I say typically because there have been a couple of years when it hasn't been, really nice. If you're in a typical weather Leadville day, you're going to be down to jersey and bibs, and that's about it by the time you start climbing Columbine. In the Rockies, though, the weather can and does go sideways. So for those just-in-case situations, check out DNA Cycling's outerwear section. They have all the jackets, vests, long-sleeve jerseys, jackets, arm warmers, knee warmers, base layers, coats, everything you need to cover you for those unexpected Leadville weather situations.
I love what DNA calls their Free Loofs Live down jersey. That's right, Free Loofs Live.
Wow.
Weird name, but a very interesting piece. Not really something you'd wear on race day, unless there's a snowstorm. But for fat biking in winter, it looks like a great piece. On the more Leadville practical side, having a long sleeve jersey, just in case, or a jacket, just in case, or a puffy jacket for your crew, just in case,
hint, hint,
is not a bad thing. Leadville is beautiful in the summer until it's not. And when it's not, you'll be wishing you had the entire DNA outerwear line at the ready.
Yeah, look over to DNA Cycling, check out their custom program, look over all their other stuff like socks, warmers, cycling caps, t-shirts, and everything else. But before you leave the site, go to outerwear. Do a little hottie weather obsession and say to yourself, what do I need just in case? Even if you don't use that clothing in Leadville this year, it's going to come in handy at some point on some ride. And everything, except for Hottie's weather app, of course, is available at dnacycling.com. Be sure to let them know that the Leadville podcast sent you.
Every part of this course kicks you in the teeth.
This is The Course. We are talking you through what you need to do to have the best possible day on the second Saturday this August, from the shotgun blast to the moment you roll up the red carpet and the 105 miles in between.
Last time on The Course, we took you from the bottom of Powerline to the Pipeline Aid Station. This episode, we are going to talk about from Pipeline to the next aid station, Twin Lakes Dam. And this is an important episode to pay attention to because it contains a section of the course that, as of last year, you're only going to see once during this race.
Let's take a big picture look at this segment first. Your goal on this segment, it's to cover the miles, obviously, but it's also to get to Columbine fueled, fresh, and fast. In that order of priority. Do not miss the near constant opportunities to eat and drink on this segment, this pipeline segment to Twin Lakes of the course.
Yeah, that is one of the nice things about this segment. Most of it is not technical, meaning that you can eat, you can drink at pretty much any given moment. It is one of those rare sections on the course where you can use it to sort of preload yourself so that you are well hydrated, well fueled when you get to the bottom of Columbine. And then you're going to need both hands. And all of your willpower to ride. We'll talk about that soon. For right now, a quick overview of this section. You are going from mile 28 to about mile 40. You are starting at about 9,600 feet in terms of altitude, and you are going to end up at Twin Lakes Dam at 9,285. In other words, over this 12 miles, you're going to drop a total of around 300 feet. That is not much of a drop, and you for sure are not dropping the whole time. And in fact, there are a few miles where you're climbing consistently. But on the whole, on the way outbound, you are going to be averaging down, which means you're going to be a little faster on this section going out than you are coming back. And that's a nice thing because you're going to be more tired on the way coming back.
Why do the downhills never feel like they're going down at Leadville?
They don't.
Except like Columbine, right?
Yeah. Oh, then you feel it.
Because, I think it comes down to the dirt out there. The pipeline dirt while overall we're headed down. Your wheels are dragging through some of this stuff, that loose over hard. Mm-hmm. There are some spots where you go down and come back up. So I think that's why we feel like we're always going up no matter what, even on the flats at Leadville. So let's break it all down. Again, it's straight and flat, or flat-ish, shall we say, coming out of the pipeline aid station. Actually, it drags uphill for a second, and then it really does flatten out. But it's never flat for long, so that's really what you want to be prepared for. When you think you're starting to get a little free run, just be ready to push down on the pedals again at some point. Good opportunities, again, here to work together. We kind of previewed this in our last episode of the course about how looking for a group as you come into the pipeline aid section. In other words, you've probably been working with a group coming off the pavement, and you want to keep an eye out for those folks because obviously you've already made an alliance. If not, if you've kind of lost them in the shuffle coming through the pipeline aid station, then again, you want to be looking for a new group or a new person to work with. So again, good opportunities to work together, although it's also a great spot for mental support, right, Fatty?
Mm-hmm.
You've experienced this quite a bit coming through pipeline, both directions.
Oh, absolutely. Moral support is as good of a kind of support as getting a good draft. The fact is you're going to be going slow enough that maybe the aero advantage is not going to be that great. But working with someone and keeping each other fast, keeping each other fresh can be a good thing. That doesn't mean that you're going to be talking a lot because remember, you are never, ever below 9,200 feet on this course. You just don't have a lot of wind for conversation. If you have enough wind for conversation, maybe you should use that extra energy to take a drink and eat something. But that said, it depends on what you're there for. Right? If you're worried about cutoffs or a PR or a podium spot, you got to focus here. You're covering a lot of miles in this race. Otherwise, if you're here because you're excited about, a bucket list opportunity and you're close to this group that you are riding with, for sure, make a friend and share the experience so far. It's some of my favorite memories of this race have to do with brief conversations I have had with other racers on the course. That said, when you're riding with a group, don't overextend and find yourself, barely hanging on. Remember what we said at the very beginning of this segment. Your priority needs to be to arrive at the base of Columbine fast, fueled, and with plenty of energy for that monumental climb at very high altitude that is coming up soon. So remember, so far you haven't really hit any of the hardest parts of the race. Soon enough, Leadville is going to earn its reputation as the highest and hardest one-day race in the country. So don't overdo it on this section.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice ride out to this point, in fact. And you've got the single track ahead too, which I think is a great motivator. Like you're kind of looking forward to that, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? We do have some kind of interesting back and forth here on the pipeline itself. There are some spots where you drop down, you make kind of a hard left at the bottom, and you come back up again. I think there are two of those spots as we head outbound on pipeline, right?
Are you talking about the technical descents or?
I'm talking about there's a couple of spots where you kind of do zigzag on pipeline. You're going straight ahead towards Twin Lakes, in other words, southbound on the pipeline, and suddenly the trail turns right, and drops. And it drops down to a low point, and you make a hard, almost a U-turn at the bottom. Not quite U-turn, not quite a 180. And you turn around and you start coming back up towards, the main, what they call 130A or B down there. I think it's 130B. So there's a couple of these little zigzags on pipeline itself, and it calls for some attention too. I mean, you get some good speed going down, and you make kind of a hard left at the bottom, and you got to climb back out of them.
Yep. You do that a couple of times. And it is worth noting here, we talked about this in the last episode, but if you want to follow along on my Strava from last year's race, leadville.fm/Strava. And that will take you to my activity that shows my times and my track on the course, altitude and all that. Pretty helpful if you haven't done this race before. Anyway, to round mile 32.6, and this is new as of last year, take a look to your left, because that is when that is the spot where you're going to be rejoining this trail when you are inbound, which at that point will be mile 70.7. For the next 3 miles, you're going to be riding this part of the course only on the outbound part of the race. And that is going to include the single track. It's going to include a technical little descent. So take a look at, from this point, think, okay, I'm not going to be doing this on the way back. And that is new as of last year. It will also be true this year, I understand.
Yes, that inbound segment, 68.3 to 70.7 is about 2.4 miles. On the map, they call that 136. Everything's got a number name out there because there's no real, right? We're talking about, we're talking about the valley section, what they call the western half of Leadville there. It's a lot of utility type area, so nothing has a true name out there. Everything has a number. So it's 136 out there if you want to look it up on a map. And that's a little connector road that you'll use when you're coming back home. And what Fatty's saying here is just take a note of it. You'll just want to see where it kind of pops in to that main pipeline trail that you've been on so far. Just take note of it. But you're going to blow right by it when you're going outbound, and you're going to be heading for the single track.
Yeah, that is going to be a trail and a tail, I guess, for another episode. There is, after you pass this place where you're going to be rejoining on inbound, that's when you're going to see the brief technical descent. It's, 100 feet, 150 feet? Hard to tell when you're just sort of bombing down it. If you have mountain bike experience, know this, it is not something to worry about. People call it Clavicle Hill and give it all kinds of spooky names. The fact is, it is a short, kind of loose, usually rocky, wide trail. So there are multiple lines, and I have ridden them with no suspension and with front suspension, and I guess with full suspension. The fact is that they are all rideable as long as you have some skill. If you are new to mountain biking, if you are coming into Leadville still kind of unsure of your technical skills, then by all means, move off to the right side of the trail, get out of the line, and walk your bike down. Don't end your race on this short descent. Don't be the person that this trail is named after.
It is one of those little sections that you just want to know what's coming up, and just get out of your saddle and move your butt back behind your saddle if you can, and bias your weight towards your back wheel. So move back, and get low, but keep your arms and knees flexed so the bike still has room to move underneath you. And obviously fingers, at least one finger on each hand on your brake levers, just in case. But you should be able to get about halfway down it, and then just let the bike run as long as you have a good line, and then chatter on down. There'll be a chatter. You'll be moving. It'll be fine. And then you're headed. Then now you have the single track. Nearly in sight. This is going to be the next kind of feature that comes upon you. The single track is actually a lot of fun. You do go through this little kind of tree section where there are some little roots you have to pull your front wheel over. So get ready for those. You'll know as soon as you enter the single track, you'll be headed for some trees, and just watch your front wheel, because you're going to have to pull your front wheel up a couple times to get over some trees, and then you kind of spit out of the trees. And then you start working the single track, and the single track will zigzag you down, for the most part, towards your next kind of paved, rocky road section.
Yeah. And because different people have different strengths and weaknesses, there's a strong likelihood that you're going to wind up either being at the front or somewhere in a group coming down this part. There's going to be someone who is going to be slower than the rest and wind up being sort of a little bit of a bottleneck. Here's my advice on this. If you can pass safely, feel free. If you can't, and it would be a dangerous pass, then just be chill. You are going to be back on pavement and wide dirt road in just a couple of minutes, and there will be monumentally many opportunities for you to do all the passing in the world. But make sure if you do see a good pass that you call it out, over-communicate. That is always good advice at this race. And if you feel like you have sort of built up a bit of a train behind you and you want to let them by, let the person behind you know, say, I'm moving over to the right, come on by, and let them go. Just be aware that once you slow down or stop to let a person or a couple of people by, it's going to be difficult for you to get going again because people are going to keep coming by forever. I mean, there are 15 or 1,600 people out on the course. It is sometimes hard to get going again on single track soon enough that you aren't going to bottle up a whole new group. So bias yourself towards staying moving on this section of the course is what I would say.
Yeah, and have fun. It's a fun section.
Yes.
This is one of your few opportunities to enjoy a little single track. So enjoy it. I mean, have fun. Talk to yourself, sing. There's all kinds of fun things to do out there. It's a good view, too. Now, after the single track, you're going to hit pavement. At mile 35.6, you'll be at 9,284 feet, which is the second lowest point on the course. If you look to your left, that's where you'll be going when you're inbound. So this is the new section they have inbound to route people around the single track. They just couldn't have two-way. They couldn't risk people coming back onto the single track inbound with wave starts. They just couldn't risk it anymore. So the new route inbound will be right there to your left. But don't go left. Go to the right. And you'll see the road you'll continue on as you're headed for Columbine.
A marshal will point you in the right direction. Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be somebody at the bottom, guaranteed. There's going to be somebody at the bottom with a whistle or something in a vest telling you, go this way, go this way, go this way. And you're going to be headed towards Twin Lakes. Now, this is an interesting little section. This one knocked me over the head, I think, the last time I was there. So you're going to be climbing, coming off of the single track. You're going to be climbing this wide dirt road, about mile 36, and climbing a decent, what feels like a decent amount. Again, sometimes the numbers defy what you're feeling in your legs, right? It's 2.5 miles, and you're climbing 300 feet, but man, does it feel a lot worse than that?
It does, Hottie. When I was sort of previewing the course, looking at my Strava for, to do this, I expected a much higher number than just a 300-foot climb over 2.5 miles. Doesn't feel like it should be that much, but bear in mind, you've just come off a little while where you have been descending on single track. Your legs cool down fast in this race. They settle down, and it takes a minute for them to get going again. But they will. You're going to find a group very quickly, work with this group on this, sometimes very washboardy section, and, take turns pulling. Again, never take a very long turn pulling, but take your turn. And after you touch pavement again, there's usually quite a group of people there who I think are doing, maybe they're crewing for people. I'm not sure. Maybe they're just spectating. Regardless, there are quite a few people at about mile 38.5. That means you have crested and you have about a mile of downhill on pavement that is going to take you into Mardi Gras, basically, to the biggest mountain biking party you have ever ridden through.
Yep. At mile 40, you're going to cross State Highway 82. That's a fairly significant road in the valley down there. A policeman is always here, ensuring that you get through. Again, folks, you're going to want to be watching for the pros and the fast riders coming back home, especially if you're in the back, third of the race. If you started in white, or maybe even a crowd in front of white, really start looking out for those return riders headed home, those fast riders headed home. And, there'll be a traffic cop here again, too, because as you cross 82, there is all of, a 20-foot piece of single track. But it is single track, and there's only room for one bike, whether it be going outbound or inbound. So you want to make sure that you have a clear path to use this. You cross 82 and it's right there in front of you. You're just going to drop. It's a little 20-foot piece of single track.
Yeah. And after that, you are in a dirt road that is lined on both sides of the road with cars. And these people are crewing for their racers. And before, Hadi, you started crewing for me, this is always where I had someone set up for me. It was a great place because it has the vehicle very close to the road so they can quickly on the inbound section get from there to the pipeline again. Now that we generally do sort of a zone defense as far as crewing, that isn't so important anymore. And frankly, I like where you have me crewed for at the Twin Lakes Dam alternate. That said, if you are a solo person crewing for a racer, this is not a bad spot to get you back out later. We'll talk more about that in our crewing episode. That is always a key episode for folks. So we'll get to that more. But be careful because there are a lot of people, even on this section, on both sides of the road, and they are watching for their racers. I have an amazing photograph of a good friend of mine who, as he was pulling in to be crewed for, a racer who was not prepared for that, actually grabbed a handful of brake, and I have an amazing photograph of him mid-endo here in this section. So it's something that you got to watch out for. Watch racers, watch people, and be careful.
Yeah, Twin Lakes feed is kind of broken down into two. You've got this section here that Fatty just described, which is just on the other side of the 82. Then you go across the dam itself, and then on the other side of the dam, you have this other long section of people feeding racers. And as far as this first section goes, the same applies regarding traffic. We're talking about, you could have people, you could have fast racers returning to Leadville, coming in here. And while they may be using, they may be on your left or would normally be on your left, they may try to cross over and reach a crew member who's actually stationed to your right. So just watch for that. Just heads up here. Watch for that cross traffic. The speeds here are good enough that a wreck would be completely devastating. So you really want to watch, for some of that cross traffic here. Then you're going to reach the end of this what we'll call the Leadville Feed Area 1, or the first section of the Twin Lakes Feed Area. And at the end of that dirt road there, you're going to veer right onto a very short section of, again, single track. Again, we're not talking about anything long here. But depending on your race place or your place in the race, you will either have a clear shot to the dam, or if you're in the back quarter of the race, one of the racers looking for a sub 12 or sub 13 finish, one of the really fast racers may intersect you here. So keep your head up. Watch and yield for other racers coming the other direction. It's not going to cost you anything. You could probably even keep your bike moving. If you just move off to the trail, say, for instance, somebody's coming your way, you can move to your right and go in the scrub a little bit and let that person get by and then jump back onto this little section of single track and head for the dam.
Yeah, these people that are coming back in the opposite direction, they are going at their absolute outer limit of ability. So expect them to be even more race stupid than you are. They are even more out of their head than you, if that is possible. So be kind to them, yield to them. They are having the race of their life if they are at that point when you are still on your way to the dam. So as we're now on the dam, and it is truly, it's indescribable. I'm going to tell you, it is a huge wall of humanity and sound and joy and excitement, and my energy level goes through the roof every time I go through there. Even though I don't know anyone there, they are cheering for you. I tell you what, you cheer back for them, and just watch the crowd go wild. It is an amazing opportunity for you to give out a little energy and watch it come back tenfold, because you're going to want that in just a couple more miles as you get through the Twin Lake Dam alternate and onto Columbine.
And remember, folks, it is on this section, so what we'd call Twin Lakes Feed Area number 2, or the second part you come to as you're outbound, that's where the timing mat is. So if you're starting to watch the clock a little bit as far as a cutoff time is, this is where you got to get. You have to get here and cross the timing mat there. And so just be aware that that's where the timing mat will be. And one other note, too, as you're crossing that dam, Fatty, they usually have some type of cement barrier in there. You have to kind of zigzag through to get through. So just a little quick, left, right to get through there. Then you're onto the dam. Then you're into the craziness. And again, hit that timing mat and you're all good. As long as Ken is not standing there asking for your timing chip, you're all good to go. Soak up that energy because you're going to need it. You're about to race the centerpiece of the Leadville 100. Maybe not the hardest part, but the centerpiece for sure. And that's the Columbine Mine Climb. And that's what we'll be talking about next time on the course.
So, Hadi, we are still waiting on that Envy mountain bike. I'm checking my mail every day, looking for a big UPS box. Not really. But I have the next best thing. It's on the Envy website, and it involves one of their sponsored riders who rides and has won on an Envy bike. Not our dream Envy mountain bike, but still pretty dang close. And he is someone who is going to be very familiar to many Leadville racers. The rider, Alexei Vermeulen, he rode an Envy road bike to victory at the Belgian Waffle Ride. He can be seen building his Leadville bike, a Factor Lando, which of course is decked out in Envy components.
Yeah, Alexei is going with Envy M5 bars and Envy seat posts, and our favorite, the M525 wheel set. He uses another sponsor of ours, by the way, Shimano. So yeah, we like this bike. The Lando is the Lando HT, which stands for hardtail. They make a full suspension too, but he was building up a hardtail. And at the end of the build video, Alexei weighs the bike. Any guesses, Fatty?
I have, obviously a pretty similar setup on my own geared bike. His component setup is darn near identical to mine. So I'm going to guess 19 and a half pounds because I figure he has a bike that is a quarter pound lighter than mine because he probably has, I bet, some boldness with tire choice that I don't have, and maybe a few access to some chi-chi parts that are hard to get. I don't know.
Yeah, geez, it didn't look like it on the build. Kenda tires were the brand, but he got his down to 19 pounds even. So
my gosh.
Pretty astonishing, right? My gravel bike weighs more than that, much more than that. So this thing is a real Leadville machine. Alexei is in the Lifetime Grand Prix Series, so he is looking for every advantage he can get, hence all those Envy components. But look, you don't have to be in the Grand Prix to chase gram savings. You just have to be in Leadville, like Fatty. So if you're looking to put your race machine on a diet, do what Alexei does. Do what Fatty does and start checking out his hardtail, Alexei's hardtail, or Fatty's, or the full suspension bike that you can get from Factor or from Specialized like Fatty rides, and start decking that thing out with Envy components. You can do that by going to envy.com. That's ENVE.com. We say it over and over on the show. During the Leadville 100, you have to keep eating and drinking. In this show, we're going to focus on the drinking in a deep and detailed way.
Yeah, it seems like it should be so easy, doesn't it, Hadi? You just drink. But if it were so easy, why do so many of us get it wrong? It turns out hydration is complicated, and it has a complexity because it seems like it really ought to be obvious, but the longer you're out there, the more extreme the conditions, the harder it gets. It's kind of like, Leadville. There is a way to get it, and that is what we hope to help you do.
Yeah, Dr. Kevin Sprouse is trained and certified in both sports and emergency medicine. He serves at the head of medicine for EF Education First Pro Cycling. He's also worked with pro triathletes, PGA golfers, NFL and MLB players, Olympic track and field athletes. He has worked in emergency rooms and feed zones, so he knows what can go wrong with hydration, and he knows how to get it right. Dr. Kevin Sprouse, welcome back to the Leadville 100 Mountain Bike Podcast. Thanks for being here. The reason why we're having you on the show is last Leadville 100, I picked up on something that was pretty profound and pretty serious. And it got warm out at that Leadville, and I saw a lot of folks suffering with hydration issues, including one of our riders, Fatty. Rohit had some real trouble with hydration on that day. And I thought, man, we got to do something about this. We got to do something about this in a serious way. And that's why we have Dr. Kevin Sprouse on the show with us. Dr. Kevin Sprouse is terrific with sports medicine. He works with the EF team, and he knows his stuff. And he's going to help us try to get this hydration issue straight. Right, Dr. Sprouse?
Yeah, that's the goal. Thank you for having me. And I can corroborate what you said. Being there last year at Leadville as a crew member, even just standing around handing bottles and nutrition to riders, it was hot. I mean, I had to stay hydrated just on the side of the trail.
So who are you crewing for?
So I went out last year. We had two of our EF riders, Lachlan Morton and Alex Howes, who raced. And then I had...
A couple of mid-pack guys.
Yeah. And then I had a few patients from my practice that were doing it as well. So some pro guys, some recreational guys.
We're going to get to how Leadville and that level of elevation affects hydration. But let's just first, Dr. Sprouse, talk about hydration and how we get it right, kind of in general. First, can we focus in on sweat rate? I know sweat rate says a lot about us as athletes and says a lot about how we need to hydrate ourselves. So how should we be looking at sweat rate, and how can we calculate our own sweat rate?
Sweat rate is basically the amount of fluid that you're losing through sweat in a given amount of time. Some people confuse this with the sodium losses, because oftentimes in the testing that you might either do or see advertised, there's mention of both. But sweat rate is just the loss of fluid over a period of time. And typically, there's kind of a wide range, but most athletes probably that are doing Leadville are going to see somewhere between 1 liter to 2 liters as kind of middle of the bell curve, liter to 2 liters per hour, sorry. What's nice is that this is a really easy thing for us to calculate on our own. Like, you don't have to go to a lab and do it. You can basically weigh yourself, work out, weigh yourself again, and the lost weight from the first weigh in to the last is primarily loss of fluid. So if you started a session and you're 80 kilograms and you finish the session and you're 78 kilograms, you've lost 2 kilograms, which conveniently converts to 2 liters of fluid. You can argue around the contribution of glycogen and things like that, but it's really probably irrelevant clinically or practically. So if you look at kilograms lost, that's liters lost during that time frame.
Right. Now, if I understand, the protocol is before you go out on your ride, and I think this would be after breakfast and after you've gotten ready, you want to strip down, get on your scale, weigh yourself, then go out, ride, right? Come back, strip down again, get on your scale, weigh yourself again, and then you have to add in, don't you, whatever you drank during your ride, and how about and whether or not you urinated during your ride to get it completely accurate.
Exactly, yeah. So you want to keep track. If you were out for 3 hours, you want to keep track of how many bottles you drank. And again, you convert that with the volume of each bottle and figure out how many liters came into the system. So you're really just looking to see what the net loss was. From a urination standpoint, you can get really technical and capture that urine, check a volume, use an empty bottle, something like that. That's probably worthless. Look and see, just kind of guess how much you peed, how many times you peed. Because what we're going for here is not an exact number, but kind of a bucket. Are you in a small bucket, medium, large? Where do you fit as a sweater? And a lot of us kind of know that intuitively. But this will help you nail it down a bit with regard to volume of sweat loss. What's important to remember too is that volume changes, even for an individual. So that volume will be different if it's hotter out. It'll be different if it's hot and you've not yet acclimated to heat. So in other words, you just traveled from somewhere cool to a hot location. You may sweat more profusely, and sweat rate may change throughout an event, especially a really long event. So the point is, if you spend all this time, weighing your fluids and capturing your urine and all that stuff, there's probably so many other variables at play that it's just not worth the effort. So it is definitely worth the effort to get a ballpark figure, though, of what your sweat rate is.
So once I've learned, how do I use that?
In the same way that you would think about kind of putting back or replenishing carbohydrates and calories, you want to put back that fluid. We'll talk more, I hope we come back around to the idea that hydration is 24/7. It's not just the hours that you're on the course. But for those hours on the course, if you recognize that your event is going to be 10 hours and you know that you lose 1.5 liters per hour, then you're roughly going to need to put back 15 liters across the course of that 10 hours, right? That's a considerable amount, and that takes some planning. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to put back exactly the amount that you lose in the same way that you're not putting back exactly the number of carbohydrates that you burn, but you want to replenish a significant percentage of that. You probably have less margin with hydration than you do with carbohydrates. The reason being, we know that performance starts to really decline once an athlete loses 2 to 3% of their body weight in fluid. So you want to keep as close to that sweat rate number as you can, recognizing that you're not going to nail it. It just helps guide things.
Well, I think a lot of athletes would say, geez, 15 liters of water, Dr. Sprouse, there's no way I can stomach get that much in my stomach. Can we train our guts to get to a respectable number or a high percentage of what we need to replace?
You can train your gut for sure. There's been numerous studies that look at training the gut for absorption of fluid, absorption of carbohydrates. It's a very dynamic system, like most in the body. So it is something that you want to practice. I think it's important to recognize too that 15 liters in this scenario we're looking at here wouldn't just be water. So that could actually get dangerous. You've heard of hyponatremia. If you're putting in just water over that time period, especially if you're not eating very much, because you get some sodium and electrolytes from what you eat as well. But 15 liters of water put back across 10 hours will probably drop your sodium concentration, your sodium level in the bloodstream, and can cause things like seizures and eventually death. I mean, it's a really bad thing to do. So the reason I mention that is the addition of things like electrolytes and even carbohydrate increase the absorption of that fluid and actually make it more tolerable during a race. So in other words, 15 liters of water, aside from the hyponatremia risk with that, is also hard for the body to absorb, and it sits and it sloshes and it causes all kinds of problems. But if you get the concentration of dissolved solutes, so whatever's in there, if you get that right, it's going to be much more easy to absorb that and absorb it quicker.
I'd love to get specific with what you recommend. You obviously have some top-level athletes that you are handing bottles to in Leadville. So don't just tell us, have something in your water. What are you putting in your athletes' bottles, and at what strength, and are they drinking anything that is just water? So give us an idea of what would be the hydration and electrolyte plan for a great athlete. Or does it change? Is it so wildly variant that you can't make a recommendation like that?
It is variable and individual, but I wouldn't say wildly so. What you need to look at is the full plan. So when you're taking a bottle, you need to have an idea of whether that bottle, the purpose of that bottle, is it hydration? Is it fueling? Is it both? Right? If you are using that bottle solely for the purposes of hydration and maybe taking a couple of gels, often we'll hand up a bottle with a gel or two connected to it with a rubber band, right? So they get a bottle that really is for the purpose of hydration, and they get their calories separate from that. And then sometimes we'll hand them a bottle that may be like a Scratch Super Fuel or a Morton or something that is a really dense caloric bottle. It'll have 400 calories in a bottle. And that's a different goal for that hand up. So it kind of depends on what you're wanting to accomplish. But in broad strokes, if we look at the bottle as being a source of primarily hydration with a little bit of calories in it, which is what it's going to be for most people, most electrolyte or hydration mixes are going to have 10 to 20 grams of carbohydrate. They're going to have some sodium, probably anywhere from 250 to 450 milligrams of sodium. And those are the two primary things you're looking at. It's going to have chloride, it's going to have potassium, it may have magnesium. Those are less contributory to the osmolarity or osmolality, which is we can use those terms interchangeably with a hydration solution. So if you hear osmolarity or osmolality, we're kind of talking the same thing. But that's a measure of concentration. So all that to say, what we're going for is something that is slightly less concentrated than blood. So osmolarity is going to be less than 300, 280, somewhere in there. And that's milliosmoles. Doesn't matter, but that's the number you're looking for. It's going to be slightly hypotonic, which is less concentrated, which is going to allow that to absorb most readily. But you don't want it at zero, right? You also don't want it really concentrated, because if you take a solution that is highly concentrated and drop it into the gut, if you remember the concept in biology of a semi-permeable membrane, where you've got something really concentrated on one side and low concentration on the other, water moves to equilibrate that concentration. So if something in the gut is really densely concentrated, so it's got tons of sodium or tons of carbohydrate or both, then water is actually going to move from the body into the gut to dilute that, which is not the direction you want hydration flowing. And it's going to cause cramping and sloshing and all kinds of stuff. So all of that to say, when we look at the protocol for an athlete, we're going to use a hydration mix that is appropriately concentrated, often appropriately for that athlete, because maybe we know their sodium losses, their sodium loss rate, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and we know whether they need something that's maybe slightly higher concentration or lower based on their physiology. But it's going to be a hydration mix with those appropriate electrolytes, plus minus carbohydrates, calculating in what they might be eating as well, whether that's a bar, a sandwich, a banana, gel, whatever.
Yeah, let's talk about sodium right now then, because that's the one that shows up on the back of our jerseys, and it becomes apparent that we're losing it. And you just told us how, dilution of our blood can be a real problem. How can we figure out sodium losses, and how can we figure out how much to put back in?
Yeah, so the easiest answer to that question is to test it, and really to test it in multiple situations. Not that that's an easy thing for everyone to do, but that's like the shortest answer, right? So there's various systems you can use that will collect your sweat and then analyze it for sodium concentration in that sweat. And what you get is a number, milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat, right? So most people, if you were to draw a bell curve, are probably going to fall somewhere around plus minus 800, 900 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. But the range is huge. You'll see athletes who are 200 to 300 milligrams, so they're really good at conserving sodium. They don't lose it in the sweat. And you'll see athletes who are 14, 15, 1800. I've seen some well over 2,000 milligrams per liter. Usually they have an endocrine disorder or something like that'll kind of cue me that we need to do some other testing. So within the range of kind of normal, healthy endurance athlete, anywhere from, call it 250 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat to 1750. So that's huge. And so the testing can be really worthwhile. There's a lot, people will talk, if you're riding in a group ride or something, you'll hear people talking about, I've got a lot of salt on my jersey, on my shorts, I'm a salty sweater, I'm not. There's not a whole lot of correlation with that I've seen in testing. Oftentimes that has as much to do with the environmental conditions. If it's really dry out, then if it's hot and dry, you're going to lose salt in the sweat, but the sweat's going to evaporate really quickly and leave that salt behind. Whereas if it's more humid out, you may kind of stay soaking wet and you don't get that white crust on there. So I'd say that's a really rough estimate and probably not one worth using, quite honestly. So all that to say, there's good rationale for the testing. It's pretty easy to find nowadays at performance centers and universities, and there's some companies that are making these patches and sensors now that you can wear. Gatorade has made one. I'm not here to tell you it's a good one. I've not used it, but they have one, and there's some other companies that are coming out with some that look maybe a bit more technologically adept that I think will be fascinating and really open this testing up to more people.
Okay, so we've talked about, estimating your sweat rate and your salt losses. Now let's underscore all this with the altitude factor, that is Leadville. How does 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet affect both of these very important things we're talking about here?
You become more dehydrated when you go to altitude, mostly because of what we call insensible losses. So not the sweat as much as the hydration that's lost breathing, that's lost from your skin. It's kind of a 24-hour phenomenon. So it's harder to come into the race topped off at altitude than it would be for a sea level race. And that's really the primary thing that I think you have to watch out for at altitude. And most of us are familiar with the advice and the adage that you've got to just drink when you get to altitude. The other thing that happens is you've got some acid-base changes that happen in the bloodstream and happens at the respiratory level and the kidney, and kind of this adjusting to altitude and the changes in the partial pressure of gases and all those things. And the end result of that is you end up peeing a lot more because of the way the kidneys are working to kind of equilibrate. So between the insensible losses from breathing and skin and the increased urination for a few days while you're up there, you just lose a lot more fluid 24/7. There's some things you can do to combat that. First would be, stay on top of your hydration, drink more than you would at sea level or wherever you came from. The other is to include things in that in those liquids that you're drinking that will help you hold on to it, primarily sodium. So again, just like we don't want to drink plain water on the bike, or not exclusively, you don't want to drink plain water just through the day exclusively. Adding some sodium, there's even some rationale for taking in some sodium bicarbonate, like baking soda, to help with that acid-base equilibration, as well as provide some sodium to hold on to fluid. So you don't have to overcomplicate it, but be aware of the fact that you're losing a lot more fluid up there.
I've been in Leadville, and every year I'll see someone who is walking around essentially with a gallon jug of water the day before the race. And I've talked with folks who have done that after the race, and they talk about that they were just peeing constantly through the event. And I admit that I kind of am, well, not the opposite. I don't avoid drinking anything before the race, but I drink a normal amount, and I worry about, what I don't want to do is spend 20 minutes off the bike peeing during the race. Where's the balance there?
Well, I think the balance is individual, for sure. But I think the balance can be attained by not drinking plain water and not forcing yourself to drink, but just being aware of a slightly increased need and an increase for those electrolytes. What the electrolytes do, if you add sodium to your water, then water in the body, in terms of diffusion, water follows sodium. It follows carbohydrate. And so if you put something in that your body's going to hold on to, like sodium or carbohydrate, then it's going to hold on to the fluid that moves with it. And if that's being put into the cells, is being moved intracellular, then it's not going to be as quick to be peed out. Where if you just drink water and there's nothing to kind of hold on to it, so to speak, it goes into the serum in the blood, it circulates, the kidneys grab it and say, we don't need this much water, and you pee it out. So you just start this hyperurination cycle. So I think the happy medium is there in the middle, where you're drinking more. Maybe you're carrying around a liter of water and it's got some sort of electrolyte mix in it with 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium that you're sipping on. And that just, I love the Scratch products personally. And so with their products, you've got 3 levels of salinity, of sodium. So the exercise hydration mix, I think is what it's called. Alan Lim, if I'm using the wrong names, I apologize. But I think it's exercise hydration, and that's somewhere around 375 milligrams of sodium in a packet. They've got one that I think is called Wellness that has 500 to 700 milligrams of sodium. I'd have to look at the package, but that would be the one that I would kind of sip on the day before. It's probably a little much to put in the gut during the race for reasons we talked about, but it's a nice thing to sip on. And if you're really dehydrated, there's a hyperhydration one that has like 1,750 milligrams of sodium per little packet that you would dissolve. And that, if you feel like you've really gotten behind, or maybe you've been a little sick, or on the back end of the race when you come off and you're just way dehydrated, that's a good one to sip on. So I like a platform like that has multiple options. With other ones, I'll have athletes even just add table salt. So if we look at one and say, hey, this electrolyte mix that you like has 200 or 250 milligrams, but we really want you holding on to more of it as a pre-hydration, throw in half a tablespoon of table salt, and just kind of mix it up. It doesn't have to be rocket science, right? So
let's talk about race day bottles real quick here, and what goes in them, what should be in our bottles. First of all, actually, I want to talk about a theory, a strategy I've heard over the years, and that is, look, we put hydration in our bottles, we put nutrition in our pockets. So how do carbohydrates affect our hydration? Is there a chance we're blowing it by putting too many carbohydrates in our bottles, trying to drink our nutrition, trying to drink our calories? Give us a good makeup, a good balance for our race day bottles.
Yeah, I think on race day, personally, there's a good rationale, a good reason to have fuel in the bottles, to have some of the carbohydrates in there. Again, it's going to be individual. If you're really looking to push the pace, so, pro rider, you're going to have less time to eat, it's going to slow you down to unwrap something, get it in your mouth, slow down a little bit to chew it, right? So finding those liquid carbohydrates that you can use is really important to those guys. It doesn't mean that's all they're going to do, but it's a fantastic option. For those of us that are much more recreational and wanting to go fast, but, happy to stop and pee and happy to stop and unwrap something and get back on the bike, then you've got more options, I guess. So for me, what I would say is the carbohydrates can be effectively delivered through the bottle. There's certainly in the last 2 to 3 years more companies that have developed and even engineered carbohydrates that are more easily stomached at higher levels. And it's again individual. The studies are kind of equivocal on whether these things work, but for individuals, I've seen them work incredibly. So remember, studies look at averages, right? For an individual, it may be the key to your performance. So they're worth playing with. The carbohydrates from a hydration standpoint, when we talked about the idea that these solutes, the things in the fluid, help you hold on to the fluid, carbohydrates can play an important role there. Carbohydrates are absorbed and turned into glycogen, which is the storage form, and then put into the muscles. And that is very hydration dependent. So a molecule of glycogen moving into the muscle pulls a large amount of water with it. So it gets it out of the serum, out of the risk of being just urinated out, and put into the muscle where it can be used. So the carbohydrates play 2 roles.
There's a breaking point with that, though, is there not, regarding calories in your bottles? Like a 600, 800 calorie bottle doesn't seem to be reasonable.
No, that's a McFlurry. That's probably not going to go so well. Most of them we're looking at with these novel carbohydrate types, somewhere around 300 to 400 calories of carbohydrate in a bottle. And that's even the upper end. Some people, again, the gut's trainable, and some people tend to be able to take in a little more, but that's really what we're talking there. And a lot of these bottles are going to be more like, 200, 250 calories. And then eating a little with that, maybe having another bottle that is just electrolytes and no carbohydrate. So it's kind of a buffet. You're mixing and matching and making sure that your overall strategy fits the bill.
Yeah, I was going to say, you wouldn't want all your bottles with 250 to 300 calories. I saw one of our athletes do that last year, and he ended up pulling out with bad gut. I mean, he just couldn't, he had nothing to dilute all those calories with. And I want to stick on the carbohydrate thing, one other thing, because I'd heard, for a while there, gel's getting a bad rap, that dumping a gel and all that carbohydrate in your gut really hurts your hydration, that the response by your body is to dump water into your gut to deal with that big carbo, that sugar dump you just put in your stomach. So could you help us balance that out a little bit? Like while we're eating, what we're taking in as far as food and how that affects our overall hydration strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think gels certainly play a role. Again, it's when you're going hard and going fast, it's hard to unwrap something and chew it. But if you can just kind of, throw a gel down, then that can be beneficial. Just saying a gel doesn't really narrow it down. I mean, there's things that you can find pureed fruit that, is packaged as a gel, and you can find these chemical slurries that are unrecognizable as food, also packaged as a gel. Like the product lines out there are vast. And so I think if we take a broad view of it, there are some that are going to be much more easily digested than others. And going back to that idea of osmolarity, the more dense a material you take in, the more chance you have that the body is going to diffuse some water or some liquid into the gut to kind of dilute it for the purposes of breaking it down and eventually absorbing it. So when you do take a gel, it's good practice to take it with some fluid, whether that's water or just an electrolyte solution behind it. But I think for most people, that's going to help them digest it better.
So early morning, Dr. Sprouse, I always drink very little just because I'm not sweating yet and I am, got the race nerves and so forth. I find for the first till I get 25 miles into the race, I generally haven't even drank a single full bottle. Is that something that is okay because I just don't feel like I need it at the time, or do I need to change that on race day?
I would say it's okay, but not ideal. It's hard because oftentimes the morning is cold, right? You're wrapped up in a down jacket beforehand. But I think it's really important. Overnight, you're not drinking also, right? And so you're having these insensible losses again, where through breathing and even just through the skin, you're losing fluids. And so you come in without being topped off. And we want to start topped off, right? And so I recommend all my patients start every day with a big glass of water, maybe a little lemon juice, a little pinch of salt, something that's going to start them down the hydration pathway before they get into coffee and everything else. And I think at the race, it's even more important to do that. So even before you get to the start line, a good-sized bottle of water with some electrolytes, and even sipping on it there in the corral, almost just out of obligation, right? Just to know that you're staying topped off is going to be a better strategy. You're not truly coming in like massively dehydrated because you don't, but in the spirit of making sure that everything's set up to succeed, it's going to be a much better strategy.
One of the things we see when we watch Pro Tour riders, Dr. Sprouse, is they can pee while riding on their bikes, and everyone thinks that's real cool. Or sometimes the whole peloton just stops and pulls over. And I know for folks who are racing the Leadville 100, for some of them, they may be annoyed by the fact that they have to, during one of their stops, run over to a bush and pee or what have you. But this is actually a good sign, is it not, that we are peeing? And how often should we be urinating during a race that takes, like Leadville, 10 hours?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good sign that you're needing to pee. If you've gotten 5, 6, 7 hours in and you haven't urinated, then you're probably not nailing your hydration. It's tough to know because there is a strategic component to it as well. And some people can just hold their bladder longer, quite honestly. Those of us who have trained in medicine are used to going all day without being able to leave the operating room or whatever. Not that that's a good thing, but there is, again, back to the trainability of the human body. So what I would say is across a 10-hour race, I'd expect somebody to have to urinate 3 to 5 times as a rough estimate.
Wow. I pee generally one time during the race. So I'm hearing this at a very personal level. I want to ask a little bit of a practical question about how we hydrate during this race. Have you worked with racers who have wondered, should I use a bottle? Should I use a hydration pack? You know the course. You've trained many racers at a very high level. Is there value in using one or the other? Have you noticed that someone using a hydration pack stays better hydrated than someone who uses just bottles? Or do you mix and match? What would be your recommendation for that on this course?
I would actually say a combination of the two is probably great. And that's what I saw last year with our EF guys. The nice thing about the packs for all of us is that it's easily accessible. You kind of remember to drink. The nozzle, whatever you call it, is hanging there over your shoulder. Like it's easy to just kind of grab a sip here and there. It's also easier to drink on a climb from one of those than to reach down, grab a bottle, be one-handed. And some of the climb, Columbine's a long climb. And so having that option to be able to just kind of sip on something, I think is huge and probably benefits most people. That said, if you don't like the way a pack feels, if you feel like it makes you hot, if it rubs, it causes blisters, then there's a potential downside as well. Definitely something to train with and see what you like. But I think there's utility in packs and bottles for sure.
Well, let's wrap here with a pre-hydration. A lot of companies now have pre-hydration mixes out now, Dr. Sprouse. I've used a few of them. I can't tell you one way or another if they help. So what's your thought on these pre-hydration mixes? And give us some protocols about using them. Are they night before and morning or one or the other? How do you like to hand those out?
I would think of it kind of like carbohydrates, that you want to have like the misinformed view of carb loading is that you have a giant meal the night before and you're ready to go, right? And that's really probably problematic and certainly ineffective. What you want to do is take at least a day or two beforehand and slowly top the tank off and make sure you stay there. With hydration, I would do the same. The marketing around the pre-hydration mixes is really good, but I'm not sure that there's anything there more than just, like we talked about earlier, keeping a bottle near you that's got a slightly higher level of electrolytes that's going to help you hold on to that fluid, and sipping on it for the 24 to 48 hours prior to the race. Being at altitude and the fact that you probably get there, a few days before the race at a minimum, I would definitely err on the side of extending that pre-hydration phase for those days, and even consider something like sodium bicarbonate, or certainly a electrolyte heavy mix that you're going to drink for a while. But yeah, I do think that can be really beneficial to a rider.
All right, Fatty. Well, your mission, first of all, is to go weigh yourself before your next ride. We want to do a little Fatty experiment with see how much fluid you're really losing on your harder training sessions or your rides, and then we're really going to get into your intake there, buddy.
I have learned so much from Dr. Sprouse here. This has been incredible. I have a lot of work to do, and it doesn't matter how many times I've done this race. I still have a ton to learn, ways I can improve. So yeah, really appreciate your insight on this.
Oh, happy to do it. And I think you should go get the sodium sweat loss testing done as well, because it's simple to do, and it can be really informative when you're planning out your hydration strategy for the race. When you know that sweat rate, so how many liters you're losing and how much sodium you're losing per liter, it becomes a very easy calculation to know what products are going to kind of suit your physiology best.
Our thanks again to Dr. Kevin Sprouse. If you would like to reach out to his team, check out podiumsports.net. And by the way, Dr. Sprouse will be back with us in a very near future episode to talk about another complicated yet critical topic: cramps.
Cramps. Oh, boy.
Ugh.
Can of worms. It is worth mentioning that Dr. Sprouse's segment on this show is brought to you by The Feed, which has a great program for our listeners. Now, Dr. Sprouse mentioned some hydration products, and you can find them all at The Feed.
Yeah, how would you like $80 to spend on any nutrition brand or product that fuels your training you're racing, and you're hydrating. Right now, you can receive $80 in annual credit at the feed.
The Feed is the largest online marketplace for athletes to shop sports nutrition, high-performance supplements, and recovery gear you need to make your workout even better.
Yeah, so claim that $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. Register your email, verify your phone number, and then you're well on your way to spending your first feed credit of $20 right away.
All right, let's wrap this episode. Again, thanks to Dr. Kevin Sprouse for setting our hydration right. We look forward to that cramps discussion, I think. Fatty and I are on social media. On Twitter, it's @FatCyclist, and on Instagram, it's @Michael Houghton. Of course, we are both on the Facebook Leadville 100 Mountain Bike Participants page. And if you want to have a conversation, join our Slack channel. You'll find a link to it over at leadville.fm/Slack.
Yeah, if you like this show, please go to Apple Podcasts. No matter what platform you're listening on to, it actually does matter. You go to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating, write us a review to see all the ways you can listen to the show. Real easy. It's leadville.fm.
Yeah, please tell your racing friends too, your Leadville friends, whoever, your daughters, husbands, wives, your enemies, and we don't care. We'll take anybody here, right? Actually, we do have listeners, Fatty, that do not race Leadville 100, that do listen to the show, and they do get something out of it. I was at a race today, a crit of all places, and I had people walking up to me saying, I listen to the Leadville show. That's pretty cool, right? And that's actually the nicest thing you can do to help spread the word about this independent podcast.
Yeah, and so again, please do go leave a review. For crying out loud, it's easy. It takes a minute. We're very needy people. We want your approval.
All right, good luck in your riding, racing, recovery, hydration. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the starting line.